Hello everyone and welcome to another week of our weekly shows. This week it's how to stand a stallion, and I couldn't have thought of a better panel. We've crossed the globe this week for our panel. We have the giant of South African racing, the leading breeder in South Africa for so many years, Mick Goss. It's an absolute privilege to have him on the show. We have Micheal Orlandi, one of the great up-and-coming stallion masters in Mullingar, with Carrascio, Smooth Daddy, just all commercial stallions that is making a real impact here in Ireland at the moment. It's great to hear about, we have Meehau with us and learn about his background. And of course, we have Tom Ryan, SF Bloodstock, an investor in stallions across the globe. So there's nobody better positioned than Tom to remark upon the global industry and how you stand a stallion, no matter where you go in this great sport of ours. So, finding your stallion. We're going to talk about all the different aspects tonight about how you find this great, the great dreamer of all is the man who puts his stallion in the stable and says, come breed your mares to this stallion. I'm going to be the one to give you those great dreams, those great days out, and those great moments that our sport can give. And, I suppose the first thing to do, though, is just touch upon with each of our guests their kind of background and how they started to stand stallions. And who better to start with than Mick Goss? Mick, the incredible impact you've made in the South African industry. You might take me back to when you were a lawyer. I'm a lawyer just like you. You're a great inspiration to me. I'd just love to hear about you and you starting off and building Summerhill Stud as you have done so incredibly over the last 40 years.
Well, I'll be as brief as I can, but let me just say that
we could be here all night, Mick. We could be here all night with someone like you on the show. So it's great to have you.
I got the illness, boys, just like you have. Don't forget I have Irish roots and I carry an Irish passport as well, which helped me during those political years when we weren't terribly welcome anywhere else. The Gosses, as far as I know, have been on horseback since they fought alongside the Maguires at the Battle of the Boyne, and I don't think there's been a generation that's skipped since. So that's the beginning of it. Summerhill, I got involved as a lawyer, funny enough, when it was in a bit of trouble many years ago, 40-odd years ago. And we syndicated it amongst a couple of pals. They didn't want to pay any legal fees, so they told me I had to take up 6.25% of the farm, and that's how it began. And I bought odds and sods until my brother joined me, my brother Pat, who's known to quite a lot of you guys in Ireland. He was a banker eventually, but in those days he was a battler like I was, and we put this thing together. And then eventually I bought him out some years later. And then we added a famous farm, which was our neighbor and which had been the greatest private breeding enterprise in South African history, Hartford, which belonged to the Ellis family. Amazingly, in South Africa, if you think about our politics in those days, there was a lot of uncertainty. And I swapped my home, or our home on the outskirts of Durban, for Hartford at a urinal one day, standing next to the guy who was the financial director there. We just shook hands. We didn't even wash our hands. We did the deal right there. So that's how it was built, but it could never have happened just like it is the story around the world without wonderful bankers. The bankers helped us. They were tremendous. I can remember the days when I used to go to England and I'd always hear every year that Coolmore and the Anglo-Irish Bank were going to sink together, and look at the enterprises they've both built over the years. Great bankers are fundamental to all of these things, and that was how lucky we got.
So some might have thought, Mick, you were pissing your money away, but actually that was quite the right thing to do at the time for Summerhill. So quite remarkable. Micheal, a lot of people that, these are weekly shows. I know you've been following a few of them, and what we're trying to do each week is, teach people about our great game and explain to them about, how you can get involved. And you might talk about your background, because horse racing wasn't, you're not from a horse racing family in your background.
No, I'm not. There's no connection to the wonderful industry that is in my family. I was fortunate that my parents got us involved, myself, my brothers and my sister, into show jumping and a bit of hunting, and from that my interest grew and it developed into racing to some extent. But I've no connection whatsoever, no family route into it. But in a way, it kind of worked towards me, because I had to go out, gain my own experience, and from that, then my interest grew. And where I am now to where it was maybe 10 years ago is it's a huge amount of, I suppose, mileage covered, but it's a huge gap, because I am still very green, but I was very green when I decided to make a career out of this, because for a long way, when I was involved in going to sales, working for different people, I did get a degree in UCD and I did work in the States, and I was still kind of teetering on, well, can I make a career out of in the bloodstock industry, or do I just go on and get a job in the general economy and keep my interest in racing and so on and so forth. So I was fortunate that I came across people like Maurice Burns and Mark Johnson that helped me helped me to get to where I am now. But no, I have, as you say, I have no connection whatsoever to bloodstock or to racing or to the Stallion game.
So there you have it. So there could be someone listening in tonight. They could be in UCD. They could be, working in the general economy. I'd say, do you know what? I might give it 10 years of hard graft, and I could be the next Micheal Orlandi.
I don't know if you want another one of me.
I don't. Maybe, perhaps not. Perhaps we might pass on that. But we will take pretty close. And Tom, you've a fascinating career and a fascinating role, because you need to find these Stallion prospects and invest in them and find the winners amongst them. And I suppose if you could just describe your business model and how you go about that each and every day.
Our business model is exactly right, as you say. We're trying to find the next great stallion. It's finding a needle in a haystack, really, isn't it? We never try to put all our eggs in one basket. We try to share the risk with others along the way. We try to find the people to invest alongside with, people that are passionate about. Some people might love the opportunity to stand in a sprinter. Someone loves to stand in miler. Another guy has confidence in standing a derby winner. We have the ability to support everybody as long as we feel that they're passionate about it and they're putting as much of their time and effort and support system, whether that be their clientele or their own personal mares, behind these young stallions to give them a credible chance of making it. So there's no question we're about the horse and we're trying to find that next good horse, but we really do focus heavily on the people that we invest with also.
So that's really interesting to hear, Tom. So there's not for you, when you're looking for investment opportunities for SF Bloodstock, it's not particularly you have a particular type of stallion each year you go out to look at, to invest in. It's more you're looking for the right fit of people that are going to be hungry to succeed for you together as a partnership. Yeah,
that's right. I think people that are investing in their own program, I think people that are credible, people that have, I suppose, a grassroots support system. Like the best advertisement for a stallion is 150 people that have paid a stud fee that are going to talk positively about that horse until they see their product go to market. It's all about momentum. It's all about getting people on board with you.
And there's nobody better at getting people on board with them than Mick Goss. Mick, when you're standing a stallion, you're thinking about finding a stallion for Summerhill Stud, throughout the years, throughout the decades, what has been your process? How do you approach finding that next big thing for Summerhill?
Well, let me just say this again. Our early inspiration here came from Ireland. We watched those guys, Coolmore in particular, but Captain Rogers and so on and so forth, who were out there battling their way. England had most of the top horses in Europe at the time, and you watch the ascent of Ireland and how they went about all that promotion. We followed that. I'm yesterday's man with the technology of today. I wrote a blog for many years. We developed a huge following that way. In fact, there was a time when Tom Magner was staying with me once. I took him into the Alexa ratings and I said, "You're behind me. You're doing less traffic than we are." And so is Darley. But blogs are gone. People don't have the time to read them anymore. To have supplanted the things we were doing. But it's the same the world over, as Tom was just saying. Now you've got to develop a momentum. You've got to sell the dream. We made lots of mistakes on the way. We picked the wrong horses often enough, and we know how difficult it is than an ATM, you know. And just finding that horse and keeping the next horse coming has been part of that trick, and maintaining a core of people around us. There was a time here when we had customers participating with us, keeping their mares with us in the early years of the Rainbow Nation, if you like, after the democratization of South Africa. We had customers in Japan. We had horses for Shaddai here. We had customers in Hong Kong, Singapore, the Middle East, as you know, Australia, New Zealand, England, Ireland, France, Germany, and the United States, people who were keeping horses with us. And it was about travel and selling them a dream in the Southern Hemisphere, which was different to the Australian or the New Zealand or the Argentinian option.
And Mick, you know, you're saying you're yesterday's man, but that's certainly not the case, because this last month you were again a pioneer, because you embarked upon, as you described, as the most deep online sale to ever occur in South Africa, and that was the sale, a dispersal of your stock. That process, and that, you know, we in Europe, we're facing into the breeze up sales. We have an online sale on tomorrow in Tattersalls. There's, you know, this is a new world for us, and I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts of having gone through that process, your reflections of how that has been for you, and what advice you'd give for us here in Europe and in North America.
Well, again, here we have Mark Webster, who perfected this technique. Unfortunately, mine was a very cumbersome platform. We were taking bids by email, and we never dreamt that with 181 horses in the sale, we would attract a buyer for every single one of them. But 322 emails came in the last half hour, and we just couldn't keep up. We couldn't respond to say you've been outbid, etc., etc. So it was a cumbersome exercise, but it was unbelievable how much traffic it attracted. And I guess it just tells us that even with a very primitive system like we had in play, if we could have made it interactive, and 20 odd years ago, we did try this at a sale, at a ready to run sale in Johannesburg. Were coming in 15 seconds after they were relayed, so we had to drop it. But now you can develop an interactive platform as have English and have it really working. We didn't get that far. Time constraints made it impossible for us to deal with it. More interest than we ever dreamt we would. And while we gave the horses away, unfortunately, it's a terrible time to be selling anything. The fact is, the underbidder was Irish. The next underbidder was a doctor, a vet in Sydney. So we did reach parts of the world which we were surprised to get to.
Okay, well, that's heartening to hear, Mick. And I suppose, Meehau, when I kind of turn to you, you know, people are thinking, you know, a stallion, you know, that's something I just hear about on the news. It's there, it's standing in a stud, and it's now available to cover. But, you know, there is a process of buying a stallion. And, you know, when Compass Stallions are thinking about acquiring a new stallion for 2021, you know, what is the process? What would you need to do to go out and buy a stallion? How does that work?
Well, for me, originally it was quite complicated, because I was keen to get involved in stallions and standard stallion, but I had no fixed abode like I do now in Starfield Stud. So I had the concept of how I would like to buy a stallion, market a stallion, hopefully cover mares. But I had to kind of piece all the pieces together of the jigsaw. And back then, you know, it's not any easier now, but, you know, I needed a location, had to create a brand, obviously raise the capital, have a business plan in place, a marketing plan, so on and so forth. But I was really, you know, I was game of blind man's buff for me. I never stood a stallion before, didn't have any real experience standing a stallion, and I knew I wanted to, and I'd watched and learned from a few people and took it in. But the process, I suppose, varies across the world. For me, at the level I'm at, for example, if I wanted to look at a new stallion for 2021, which I am, I normally register my interest. You're probably keeping an eye on a couple of horses. You would find out exactly who's the person to speak to and make the offer to. And I like the deals in general, the offers to be very black and white, very transparent, very straightforward. And but it varies because I'm in a position where I'm probably have the smallest available funds to potentially buy a stallion prospect compared to my competitors. And so I have to kind of either act very early or potentially to play the waiting game and act very late and hope things fall fall in the right direction for me. But it is difficult. You're trying to buy a potential stallion prospect from people who are enjoying racing it. They're not contemplating standing it. They're also advised from their in-house team advisor, from the racing manager, Bloodstock agent, whoever. And the true value of a stallion when it comes to in the nitty-gritty is what people are willing to pay for it. And I know that when I normally go to try and purchase a stallion, I know that what I can't potentially pay what my competitors can pay. So I need to think of ways of maybe attracting that owner to sell me that stallion prospect in whatever way we end up doing the final paperwork contract. But in general, I like to keep it black and white. You've got to be ready to act when a stallion prospect does. If a horse gets injured, ready to act and A, make your offer, and B, pay for him. And but look, in general, I find it relatively difficult in a way because you're dealing with people, and that's probably the most difficult thing about it, is that people have an influence, people change their minds, and people always think the grass is greener on the other side. But in general, it's a transfer of funds, it's a transaction, and if you can come to an agreement and you do that, hopefully you've purchased a stallion for 2021. But the easiest part is probably buying the stallion. It's everything goes with it, in marketing them, in promoting them, and getting people to believe in the stallion. And as Tom mentioned earlier, the momentum is key. It's probably the most important word, I think, in standing a stallion. And it's getting everyone in the same boat, rowing together in the right direction behind the stallion with you. And I'm always conscious when I am looking to buy a potential stallion, I would touch base with a couple of people who I see as to me, they're great advisors, but they're key pillars in my industry. For example, like Paul McCarthy, and I also run past Paul or different people like that, what their thoughts are on the stallion, or the racehorse if you went to stud. Where would you pitch him in at? Would you use him, and so on and so forth? And that gives me a bit of reassurance to make sure that I'm on the right scent for the right stallion. Because the last thing you want to do, which I've learned, is potentially buy a stallion and suddenly you realize the market has decided they don't want to use them. And as I said, so that's the easy thing is buying them. It's filling the book afterwards. It's the hard part.
The easiest thing is buying them, which I think is a really interesting thing to hear Micheal say. And Tom, if I was to ask you, okay, the easiest thing to buy them, but you have to have investors out there that are excited about investing in Bloodstock as a business opportunity. And we know there's a world of investment opportunity out there that people can spend their money on instead. What do you say, and how do you explain it, that people are attracted to stallions as an investment prospect?
I suppose it's, in the Northern Hemisphere, we co-invest with other major farms. It's what's important to, we're not necessarily selling shares, but we're hopefully making the prospect a little easier for the stud farms in the fact that we're good supporters, and we have a pretty good track record of getting a return on our investment and making the investment work for ourselves and for other people. In Australia at Newgate Farm, Henry does an amazing job. We've gone out, we bought made racehorses as Grade 1 winners, syndicated amongst a group down there, and stud them very successfully. We've gone out and we bought yearlings, raced them, won Grade 1s with them, had champions, syndicated them, and are in the process of standing them at the moment. Both very high risk propositions, very expensive propositions, but we really target not an investor as much as a support system. There's a lot of money in the world. There's a lot of people out there that could park money somewhere. we don't that's not what we really try to attract. We try to attract people that can help at every level, people that can bring the support of broodmares, people that can bring some marketing expertise, people that are interested in possibly buying foals or yearlings by said stallion, and people that are willing to take that little bit more risk than most. And again, you know, you're really, you want a guy that's willing to go the whole hog, you know, not just send the mare the first year, but a guy that's willing to get behind a horse and make him important until we have some visibility on him.
And that's really interesting. It's interesting, Tom, to hear you talk about, you know, your experience buying yearlings to make stallions when they're at the end of their racehorse career. Like, how does that process work for you? How do you think about a yearling in terms of a prospective stallion? Is it kind of, you know, quantity? Is making sure you spread your risk with a number of yearlings? How do you approach that with SF?
Well, last year we had we have a new syndicate put together, and the word syndicate is, I'm a big proponent of syndicates. I love syndicates, and I love what it means for the industry and what it can become for the industry. But the syndicate we put together recently in North America has its first crop of 3-year-olds now. And out of that crop so far, we've syndicated 3 stallion prospects successfully to 3 different farms, which is very exciting. You know, that crop was a crop of 24 horses. I would imagine we'll end up with 17 or 18 runners out of the 24. You know, there's attrition, as we see in every part of this industry. And how do we approach it? Well, we simplify it really. One, we use Bob Baffert, who to me is
that's not a bad plan to begin with.
Like I believe the advantage in that alone is significant. And 2, we have a great selection team, you know, and we use the word team quite frequently. You know, we're not a ego-driven group. We're a success-driven group, and to be successful, you have to put a good team of people together to get the results. And you know, Henry Field comes up from Australia to help. Donato Landy is on the ground, very important, integral part of the group. Frankie Brothers works with us; he's part of the Starlight group. But you know, within our group, we have Starlight Racing, we have Madacat Racing, amongst others, and within those 2 operations, they're syndicates themselves. So there's syndicates within syndicates, and you know, we're spreading the risk. We're spreading, you know, hopefully we're enjoying the upside and sharing the downside.
So just so I get my stats right, so you said 24 a crop of 24 horses, and you've got 3 of them are stallions as a result of that, or stallion prospects at least, coming into your 3-year career. Is that correct?
So, yeah.
That's 12.5%. That's not a bad strike rate. So I'm looking around the back of my couch to invest next year if you can achieve those stats again.
We feel very fortunate that the group has come up so strong, and it's a remarkable group of horses. So and one thing we do stick with is we stick with proven sires. We're very focused on proven sires, and you know, it's those proven sires that are 10, 12, 14% sires to start with. There's an advantage right there, isn't there?
Absolutely. And you know, we've heard about finding your stallion, but once you've found your stallion, you need to promote that stallion. And you know, there's only one man I can turn to about promoting stallions, and that's Mick Goss. And Mick, when you're thinking about getting people excited about your stallion, what are the principles you apply in doing so?
Well, we're in a unique environment down here, very different to the one you guys operate in. I'm always so envious of people like Tom and Henry Field and so on and so forth, who they link with because of our export protocols. And I've got to pay some tribute to Ireland right now, because you guys have been enormously helpful in getting us to the point where we're about to be audited by the EU. We would have been if it hadn't been for the business of being able to move horses in and out of the country, which would make a huge difference from an investment perspective, purely because we can develop alliances. We find we shop in very much the same circles as the French. Chaps like Micheal, who's buying not the top in shuttles with horses like that. But our old tried and tested thing here was to have a solid base of people on whom we could call to invest with us. But we used to put out those big brochures that Coolmore does, that you see that Dali does, and send those out to the world that way. But we used to make a DVD as well, which was a story. It wasn't just about the horse's career, his races and so on. So we'd tell a 25-minute story about it. That Sky Racing Channel in Australia bought that DVD of ours. Well, they traded it with Teletrack for several years. And so that was how we reached the market. I think that those stories on those DVDs were unique. They were not being used by anybody else that I know of. Spin-off we got from them. Again, that's all changed. The world has changed, as you know. And we've got to find another way of getting ourselves back online. Facebook, Twitter, I guess, all the new remedies. We've lost those.
Okay, and I suppose that's really interesting to hear. I'd be interested to hear Meehau's reflections. This picture is Meehau standing with his stallion, Smooth Daddy. And Micheal, when you're thinking about, you started off in an industry, you came from a non-racing background, and you're putting your flag in the ground, and you're saying, I'm going to stand a stallion, and I want you to send me your mare. What was your principles in terms of getting people excited about that mission and excited about your stallions?
I suppose at the start it still is quite difficult, but you have to remember it's a very traditional industry where the stud farms that stand stallions in Ireland in general have been standing stallions for generations. So I was very much up against it. And if we rewind the clock a bit, the history of stud farms and stallions in Ireland, we have a great tradition for it. We were probably very successful at it. Maybe one of the best places to have stallions and to breed your mares. And but there's also an incentive from Charlie McCreevy many years ago, Charlie Haughey, I should say, where stallions, income from stallions was tax-free. And that really drove the marketplace in Ireland to be a place to stand stallions. And it was easier, potentially, it was before my time, I don't remember, to maybe raise funds to have stallions in Ireland, to stand stallions in Ireland, and so on and so forth, and for mares to come here. Since then, probably, I think that stopped around 07, 08. Also, recession happened around the same time. And what you probably noticed in the last 20 years from that time, but even maybe before that time onwards, the number of stallion farms had reduced, the number of stallions stud had reduced in Ireland. And also there was a growth in France for the French premiums and both racing and breeding premiums. So the landscape in Ireland had changed a lot, and I decided I would like to get involved in this game. And in the meantime, from the tax incentive going and also the recession, the stud farms that survived it grew massively in market share. If you look at the return of mares and Weatherbees, probably 3, 4, 5 stud farms roughly cover 67% of all flat mares in Ireland. So I very much knew I was up against it, and I looked around and I could see that next door to me in Tallyho they had huge market share alone. But I knew that there was an opportunity there if you had the right horse, because I do know people will use a stallion that they see a potential in being a successful stallion. But what did I sell? I sold a stallion. The first stallion I got was probably crucial. That was Capella Sansevero. And there's a couple of things out of my hands that made him. We got over 100 mares into him in his first year, which only around maybe 15% of all stallions in Europe get over 100 mares. So it was a flat stallion. So it's a huge success. But he raced in Ireland. He was a top lot. The first London sale that got ran, he sold for 1.3 million. He was probably Gerald Hines' first top class flat horse. And the horse had a lot of momentum. He was highly thought of. He went, Qatar Racing bought him, Sheikh Fahad bought him. And a lot of people in Ireland knew the hearse. He was the first crop of showcasing. That was very chancy, you know. Showcasing at the time looked like a very progressive stallion, but we didn't know he was going to, you know, succeed the way he has. So Capella definitely helped that he was a hearse that bought. A lot of people that used him had seen him race and knew about him. But he was a kind of a falling star, because we bought him after his 3-year-old campaign where he disappointed. He ran in 2 guineas. At the time, there was talk maybe he would continue racing the 4-year-old, go back sprinting. So I just had to reinvent him and remind people about Capella Sansevero, and then tell them about me. And as Mick mentioned earlier, a bit about my story, who I was. No one knew me. And I'm I think the world of the people, you know, if every breeder comes into me, but I really think the world of the people that came into me in year 1, who trusted me, who signed a contract and were willing to use Capella Sansevero when they had spent years going to the likes of, you know, Tallyho, Ratasker, Joe 40 down there in Ballyhane, and, you know, Gail Callan, whether it was Coolmore. You know, they had spent, you know, years doing business with the same people, and then they decided, oh, we'll give this guy a go. I think the hearse definitely helped. He was a very good walking hearse, he still is. And a couple of people decided to use him, and then word spread who was using him, and that helped. But one thing I did with him that I haven't done since is I brought him to the Goff February sales. And at the time, you know, still stallions don't turn up at the Goff February sales. February is the month just before the season kicks off, or it is the month the season kicks off. Sean Flannery was working there at the time. He helped me to get the stallion there. So I showed the stallion to a lot of people. Had a huge amount of footfall. It was a way of me introducing myself to the marketplace and people meet me and seeing the stallion. And the February sales, of course, people come to buy hearses, sell hearses, but it's also a day where people had come for a cup of tea and a sandwich, see what's going on, have a chat, catch up with friends. And that was one thing that really helped me. And obviously, you know, you do everything else. You know, we littered the Irish field with adverts. We gave them a push. But, you know, I suppose it was a combination of a few things that helped to get me to 100 mares. But as you know, Jack, and as a lot of people know, I bought a stallion in the second year, and that was Stratburn, who actually had his first winner there recently. And he was a disaster. Commercially, he was a disaster. And I probably learned more standing him in my second season in covering only a handful of mares than I did with Capella in his first season.
So just maybe, look, I don't want to kind of dwell on something that was a difficult thing for you, Meehau, because, you know, Capella Sansevero, he's rewarded the people who've bred to him, you know, Pierre Lapin, one of the most talented horses last year, and he's continuing to go. I know he had a great book this year, as did Caraccio. But talking about Stratburn, like, and him not being the appeal to the market as Capella Sansevero, you know, he was a very talented sprinter. He's very like Capello. What was it about him that just made him perhaps not fly as much as another stallion that you stood the year before?
He had a higher rate and time for him. He cost us more money. And I thought that I could kind of keep the 100 plus breeders I had in-house and help, you know, would help Stratburn. And I knew people at the level we're at aren't overly keen to use the second season stallions, so I get a new toy in the shop window to promote. Number of reasons. He didn't race in Ireland. At the level I was at, I had no affinity with him. Again, I bought him at a stage where, you know, he didn't have a great season. He was with Charlie Hill for most of his career, and he was at Robert Carroll's when we ended up buying him. We bought him a year too late. We bought him a year after he came second to Twilight Sun in the Group 1 Haydock Sprint. He was by his son of Equiano. And even though Equiano is a source of Group 1 horses, but he's not a top class 30, 40, 50,000 pound stallion. And now you know, Stratburn was a big, good looking bay, and he might not have the walk of Capella, but he was a nice type. And that year, the year that we're now currently running 2-year-olds, there's a huge number of first season stallions, massive number. And the market, you know, they pick what ones they want to use, and they all just sway towards them stallions. So you either are fortunate and you get your 100 plus mares, or you don't and you get very few mares. There was no middle ground. And it was I soon realized that, you know, even before we probably covered a mare, that this horse wasn't going to click with the marketplace. They had made up their minds and decided who they wanted to use. There was probably a number of outside factors. You know, we see next door to me in Tallyho, they had 2 first season stallions in Maymas and Vadamos, but both very popular. And Derek Eisen, I remember, had a first season stallion in Escogar, and Derek at the time had got huge numbers into another stallion he had called Ali Heb, and I think a lot of the breeders came back and bought breeding rights or whatever they did in Escogar and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to say is, there's only such a pool of mares in Ireland, and there's only such a pool of mares that go use first season stallions at the 5-10 grand level. And when the market makes up their mind in the stallion, that's kind of it. It's very hard to sway the marketplace, regardless of how many adverts I might do in Irish Field with Brendan McCardle, etc., or how many brochures I fly out, or whatever I do. And sadly, that horse never got a chance. And I had to look back and work out, go through the return of mares, why certain stallions were popular. But as I think Tom Ryan mentioned earlier, momentum's a key word. And I had momentum with Capella, but by God, did I lose it in my second year. And the momentum swayed elsewhere for various reasons.
A kind of tale of woe after a tale of success. But Tom, I'm really interested to hear you, because the way you promote stallions is by going out and supporting them at the sales. You back your judgment that this stallion is going to be a success on the race course, and you're going to invest accordingly. How important is that for your business model when you're pitching up, saying, "Give me, I'd love to co-invest on the stallion with you," that you will back it up in the sales ring?
Yeah, I think we back it up in the reverse order. Like we'll often, let's say, a young stallion like Phoenix of Spain. This year we would have bred 12 or 14 mares to him, and several of those mares will be graded stakes producing mares, and several of them will be graded stakes winning mares. Like we somewhat sacrifice good mares to unproven stallions. And it's a very risky thing to do, but to get them off the ground, you've got to get them under them, and you've got to put them. There's no point in having the Phoenix of Spain progeny in the equivalent of Buck 6 at Keeneland. You need them somewhere kind of front to middle rather than middle to back. Otherwise, you're always going to be middle to back, So that's how we support them, and we support them quite heavily doing that. And we sell foals and we sell yearlings, and we really try to get people's attention early on. And it's often the second season is the hardest season for a stallion, because people don't necessarily have visibility. So it's upon us to make sure that we put the right foals in the marketplace to ensure that people get to see what they're capable of as soon as possible.
And that's really interesting to hear. And I know Cathal Beale is delighted the way Phoenix of Spain has gone, that your support has been rewarded. He's got over 150 mares this year, and he's looking great in the Irish National Stud. I just saw him this weekend. But Mick, I'm really interested to hear what you would say about what Tom was saying there, the difficult second album, the difficult third album. It kind of keeps going on until you see those horses run and prove themselves on the race course. How at Summerhill do you approach that problem and still make them relevant in their second, third and fourth years?
Stallions don't die quite as quick a death as they do in places like Australia and Europe and so on and so forth down here. We don't have as many competing in the same generation of sires. So it's slightly different. Tom's model is fantastic because he's got great allies down in the Southern Hemisphere as well. And there's a lot of money behind them, and you can do that. We're in a different environment here, and people tend to stick with their horses for a little bit longer. Clearly, the second season is not quite as good as the first, but we've always sold it on the basis that the second crop of foals will be better than the first because we'll get the recipe right. If we're sending a horse a cocktail of mares of different types the first year, we think we've got the right types, but when the foals arrive, you find that maybe there's a different type of mare needed for the horse. So you go out and you persuade breeders that we can do better than we did with the first crop. And we don't quite write them off as quickly as certainly down in Oz. I can, so many horses there are considered failures by May. We're only starting to see our first stakes races for juveniles in April or thereabouts. So we don't come to the end of the road quite as quickly. So the momentum thing, which is Tom's big story, we're able to carry through for a little bit longer. and people will give a second season to a horse just when he needs it. And as Micheal said earlier on, it's the second season really that bites, because when they've seen the first foal, sometimes they're inspired to come back in the third season.
And Mick, that's really interesting to hear that, you know, in South Africa, it's a little bit more of a late bloomer. But, you know, one thing that definitely blooms is when you come to Summerhill and the experience of seeing your stallions. And that,
but again, as I said to you,
sorry, Mick, I'm going to cut you off there. I don't think the connection is great. But I wanted to ask you, Mick, about the, you know, you talked about that it's a late bloom in South African racing for your stallions, but actually, you know, when you come to Summerhill, it's a real experience to go see those stallions. You know, you really put on a show. There's hospitality. How important is that to your business model? That big Mick Goss welcome that you give to so many that have come to Summerhill.
Remember, you know, again, I'm yesterday's man. I've sold the place, so I'm exiting at the moment, but. Let me say this. We had one very, very fortunate event in South African racing, and that was the Durban July, which brought people in from all over the world. We used to get more than 20 nations attending our Stallion Day on the Sunday after the Durban July. Every year, heads of state, prime ministers, big investors, many of your own countrymen would turn up because they were here for the races. So we had a captive audience. And we'd put on this DVD and we'd put on lots of hospitality. It's a beautiful farm. It became a day that was cemented into the national calendar. And the value of being able to do that with 500 guests from all over the world is inestimable. And I can remember going to Walmack many years ago when the legendary Johnny Jones was still around. And he had a day that was similar to that. There were hundreds of people, many of them your own countrymen, whom I always joined at the table. And so we took lessons from pals all over the world, as we've always done, and then added our own signature to it, if you like, our own South African flavor to the thing. But we were very lucky with the Durban July because it was the international event, and we weren't sharing it with any other farm in the country. It happened to be in our province. Our province is a bit isolated, by the way. We're a little bit far away from the epicenter of breeding. We're 1,000 miles from the epicenter of breeding in this country, which is in the Western Cape. But the major racing season in South Africa is in Durban during the winter months. We're like Florida in the winter months here. Beautiful days, et cetera, et cetera. So, and most of the Group 1 races and the championship races are run at the end of the season. So it's the gathering ground of racing people. And so we had this day when everybody turned up, and it was like taking candy from kids.
Taking candy, well, that's great to hear. And I suppose taking candy from kids and certainly a stallion that I would love to be involved with and feeling the kind of getting the gifts he's given is Galileo. We're looking at a picture of Galileo now. And I suppose, Micheal, I'd love to hear your reflections because, you know, making a stallion, we can talk about the first, second, third season, the fourth season and the gimmicks and everything else, but there's nothing better for a stallion than delivering on the racecourse. We've just seen Galileo, 85 Group 1 winners, the most any stallion has ever achieved. He had the winner of the 1,000 guineas, hit the winner of in both England and Ireland this year. When you reflect upon your rivals, perhaps, you know, and you're thinking about the way they make stallions, what lessons have you learned from them that you're hoping to apply with Compass Stallions in trying to build up your stallions?
Plenty. I know what Tom has discussed about having, you know, I suppose a team of people involved at every stage to make these stallions successful. I don't look far to look at Tally-Ho down the road for me to see how they do it and how they go about it. But I do remember going to Tally-Ho and, you know, and in any stud farm where, you know, Tony stood the likes of Tillerman, Chevalier, etc. A lot of stallions, Mr. Genus, that weren't successful. So first you have to be aware that majority of stallions are going to stand, regardless of the amount of homework you do, and if they tick X amount of boxes, the likelihood of them being successful is still very slim. And that doesn't mean you don't give it your all. But you look around, and I spend a lot of time looking at which ones were successful, and we have to remember, like, some might say you were mentioning the success of Galileo and it was in comparison to Dane Hill. But, Dane Hill was, probably thanks to John Massar and his time in Australia, was late to the scene to an extent, but, he was a phenomenal stallion. So was, Scat Daddy, ever son of Scat Daddy, thankfully. And, they were probably under the noses of, the great Cool Moore. And, but, they were sending mares to Sad as well, they were sending mares to Warfront, etc. And these two great stallions were under their nose. But, you got to think, for me anyways, I've got to think outside the box. I'm thinking of my budget. I'm also thinking of, who will use this stallion. I'm very conscious when I look at purchasing a stallion or standing a stallion that to have as many attributes that I think is important to become a successful stallion. I don't mean commercially just successful, but I mean, as to breed winners, because to breed winners, the winning post decides all, the horse will become very successful, hopefully. And that's one of the reasons why maybe we took the approach of looking at Carroccio, standing Carroccio. He's not a first season stallion. Most studs stand first season stallions to buy a stallion prospect off, from the racetrack. I saw in Ireland that to some extent maybe the demand for first season stallions was weaning a small bit. The proven stallions at the marketplace were becoming more and more expensive. There wasn't a huge amount of options available for a semi-proven horse, and one was probably, Fast Company that Darley have sadly passed away. So I thought it was an opportunity, without going into the stats and figures about Carroccio, he ticked a lot of boxes as a stallion himself, but he was a horse that I could bring to the marketplace that I knew could produce, he's produced a Group 3 winner, who could produce winners at a price that would attract breeders to use him. And, you mentioned second, third, fourth season stallions. We had a great year with him last year, covered over 100 mares. But this year he's actually covered more mares, and we did over 150. And a big part of that, as Tom has mentioned, is momentum. And when a stallion has momentum, like the way Carroccio has momentum, it's much easier, or it's not much easier, but it is easier to make a success out of them, because the people who've bred to them, the marketplace, all very positive, and thankfully Carroccio, he breeds a nice foal, and we know he can breed a winner, and it kind of snowballs. You kind of create this self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. And that's where I am with Carroccio. But I look around and, if we all get it wrong, people buy stallion prospects, you see, they're a penalty kick, surely they're going to succeed. And I just look across, Tally Ho beside me, to have roughly the same broodmare bands as I send to all their stallions every year. So if you look at a mare from Tally Ho, she's gone to the last 4 or 5 stallions that, Tony and Anne and Henry and Roger have stood, but she hasn't clicked with them all. But it's, look, if I knew what it was that made a stallion successful, I probably wouldn't be here. I'd be off on a yacht in the Caribbean somewhere. But, we don't know. But, the winning post decides all. I just try to, I'm very conscious of trying to buy a horse that ticks as many boxes as possible, that will breed a winner. And if that can happen, then, if you can create momentum, it's a good chance that stallion will kind of leapfrog his way up the ladder to become a very successful and commercially very successful stallion.
Okay, well, it's great to hear your reflections of Tally Ho. I know Tally Ho, Roger O'Callaghan, who joined us for How to Pinhook a Foal earlier in the series. But Tom, when you look across the globe, here we are. We have Mick Goss, giant of the South African industry. We have Micheal Orlandi in Mullingar, and we have you in Kentucky. And you're thinking about the industry as on a global basis with SF Bloodstock. Where do you see kind of the great bastions of opportunity, if you will? Where do you see kind of where like you talked about Henry Field and Newgate. I know Henry watches in. Where do you think you would like to be investing in the coming years that you see real opportunity?
Look, talking of Henry, I think there's massive opportunity in Australia. I think it's almost obvious at the moment. Australia have a very young support base of investors, and investment down there, again, back to syndication, is often done through syndication. And you have so many different platforms to get involved down there. The platforms are, the bus driver that wants to invest $500 a year to have a scream on a Wednesday night, or you got the, a $1 million man that wants to put up his $1 million and own 10% of 10 real horses with a real trainer, and diversify his circle of friends and give himself a chance of owning a big horse on a big Saturday, with the chance of a return on his investment. The prize money in Australia is enormous. The second-hand market in Australia makes it also quite viable in that there's a very strong market in Hong Kong for a good horse, but then there's also a great market into other regions such as Macau and Singapore for nice racehorses. So I like the Australian model. They have heavy focus on welfare down there. They have heavy focus on a level playing field. I think their sport is very much on the up and up, and they have the leadership is playing a major role down there, and it's something we're lacking in North America. You know, we're lacking that leadership, that unification. You know, and through troubled times like this, it's telling.
Okay, it's great to hear, and kind of your kind of whistle-stop tour around the globe, Tom. And I think it would be, I can see the participants that are tuning in online. We've dozens of people wanting to hear from Mick Goss and hear his reflections about the South African industry. Mick, when you look to the future of South Africa and what that looks like, what are your hopes for South African racing?
Things have been bleak until quite recently. The economy's been in trouble, racing was battling, and of course COVID have brought about a real disaster for racing. But we've got some incredible people in this game, in this country, and amazingly Mary Oppenheimer, Mary Slack, as you'd know her as an investor in your Goff's premier sale every year.
She very kindly bought a yearling off me last year, which I'm very thankful for. So thank you to Mary, also supporting the Irish industry.
Well, she's also got another very good horse from your dad, as you know. But having said that, Mary has put up an independent fortune to support racing. And just like the end of the Second World War or the demise of apartheid or whatever you might want to say about the history that's affected this country, you almost need to have nowhere to go before you eventually come up with a model which everybody buys into. And in all the years I've been in racing, I'd say as disastrous as it's been and as tough as it is at the moment, we've got an opportunity now to bring about a model of consolidation and cohesion, which is what Tom was talking about in Australia, where everybody sings from the same hymn sheet and we come up with an efficient model. She's advised, Mary is, by some very, very smart banking and financial people, as well as horse people. And I think South African racing's probably got an opportunity from the rags down there at the bottom now of bringing out a model that will really work. And when we get our exports going again, we'll be able to buy more horses from the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere, of course, and we'll be able to sell a couple of horses. But there are obvious allies for us as well out there, and I say that in the sense that there are markets that will open up. Australia is an obvious market, but the less obvious markets, South Korea, obviously Singapore and Hong Kong, India suddenly are looking to open their racing. They've been a closed shop for so long. There's a hell of a lot of money in India, chaps. And these guys are looking for allies in terms of fellow investors as well. So let's never forget them. And I guess that the Chinese model is the one we're all waiting for. You guys in Ireland have been very proactive about how you've approached China. But that's a waiting game. The others are more apparent and they're more immediate. So from a South African perspective, sadly, I'm leaving the game just as these opportunities are opening up. But that's crab at age. You get to the point where you've got to draw a line. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the guys that are stuck it out, that are still in the game, really making some decent dough and being able to become role players internationally again.
And I think, Mick, what a legacy as well, and a great inspiration to me that this bit part lawyer can also make an impact in the racing game. And it's wonderful to see the contribution you've made to the South African industry over the last 40 years. It's been absolutely incredible. And I know Tom Ryan also does believe in that connection with the South African racing, because he has a share in a syndicate with Mick Flanagan, and Mick Flanagan, a protege of Mick Goss once upon a time in South African racing. So I'm delighted that Tom is also a believer in South African racing. But Tom, look, one question hasn't come up yet, and I think it's an important question we ask, and that's the 140 mare limit in American racing and how that affects American racing going forward. You know, this is something we're looking at in Europe, and I'd love to see your perspective on this and your thoughts on it as an issue.
Look, my thoughts on it are, I feel very fortunate to live in America, and you know, the American dream and all that goes with it, and the land of opportunity. And I'm not necessarily a massive believer in regulation. I believe in a free market, and I kind of, in some sense, I believe those that are trying to regulate this seem to be trying to slow down those that have come in here full of innovation and worked hard to create a broad base of clients that are willing to breed, whether it's 170 or 220 to a stallion. I think any person that signs a contract, whether it's 190 or 220, they're doing it as a consenting adult. You know, there's nobody really forcing them to do it. And, you know, and the service agreements get signed because people believe that that's the best opportunity for their own personal business. It's the best way for them to support that mare, or it's the best commercial decision that they can make. And, you know, from a stallion health perspective, you know, I think a stallion covering 140 mares is jealous of a stallion covering 200. You know, it's very few of them turn down the work. You know, the gene pool argument, personally, I don't believe it holds water. So, you know, I wouldn't change a thing. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the coming years.
Okay, great. Well, we have 3 minutes to go. We're to wrap up, just kind of a quick rapid fire, little, you know, words of advice, words of wisdom for people that want to stand stallions in the future. They're watching this YouTube clip, and they're thinking about their career and building towards that maybe as an ultimate goal. Micheal Orlandi, if I was to turn to you, what would that one piece of advice be that you'd give?
Geez, it's very difficult to give you one piece of advice, but I know Tom mentioned Henry Field. Look at Henry, look at his career. Look what John Massara did in Australia. Obviously, John Magner across the water for me at Harper's done very well in Whispering Manor there recently. Yeah, look at these people. Look what they've done. How they've gone about it. The marketplace forever changing. But look, if you want to do it, get up and do it. No one's stopping you.
And if there's anyone that gets up and does it, it's Mick Goss. Mick, if you were to reflect on your career and the impact you've made, what's the one tip of advice that you'd give to people that are watching in tonight into making stallions a success for them?
I think if I was starting out, I'd do it exactly the same way as I've done it. I'd go and watch people like John Massara, like the whole Coolmore group, the pioneering work that you Irish have done all over the world. You know, I went to a breakfast with Tony O'Reilly some years ago, and in our country, Tony O'Reilly was an absolute legend as a winger in the 1955 British Lions. He said, you know, Ireland has populated the world with presidents, priests, and prostitutes. And what you've done for racing as a country, you Irish, what you've taught us all over the world, let me just tell you, I'd go back to Ireland if I was starting out again to go and learn about promoting horses, and I'd go and find the Irishmen all over the world, like Tom Ryan in America, like those guys down in Australia who have all learned from you Irish. That's what I'd do if I was kicking off in the world today. And I think then I would adapt it to my own circumstances.
Okay, brilliant. Well, it's an all-Irish panel, of course, tonight, Mick, because I know you have an Irish passport, so we do need to dwell on that. We should probably have a bit more diversity the next time. But Tom, last final word to you. Little bit of advice. What would you say about standing stallions? Is there anything we haven't touched upon that you would give as a little, as an extra bit of advice?
Look, I'm not a president or a priest, but you know, you've got to be willing to get out there and get behind them and believe in the product that you've got. And I mean, it's cliche, but I mean, guys, to be successful, you have to work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and you have to outsmart them and you have to outwork them, and that's the only way you're going to do it.
Okay, there you have it. Well, it's Sunday evening. Why aren't you at work? We should all be out there hustling away, finding our new Stallion prospects. If you've got feedback, I'd love to hear it. You can hit my Twitter account. I thank you so much to our 3 fabulous guests spanning the globe tonight: South Africa, Lexington, and Mullingar. We're also now on Spotify, which is pretty exciting and pretty bizarre to me. But if you want to listen to it on Spotify, you can. We've got the first episode we've ever done. That's up there now, and we'll build it over the next couple of days to the complete set. So if you're on the go, you can listen in on Spotify or any of your podcast accounts. Next week, really a fun one. I'm really looking forward to it. Nancy Sexton is going to join us, and 2 more yet to be named guests. We're going to talk about Horse Trader, the life and times of Robert Sangster. It's our racing book club. I'm really looking forward to that and that discussion. That's going to be great fun. And finally, if you want to buy into our bargain breezer, we have Mick Goss on and we didn't even get to touch upon it. He's the pioneer of ready-to-run sales in South Africa. We're going to be buying a breezer in a week's time, and we're really looking forward to that. We're going to be buying 3 breezers now, thanks to your support, which is really great. You heard Tom talk about the importance of syndicates, and you're all getting so behind that. So thank you very much for that. Thank you to our 3 panelists. It's been a great chat, and we'll see you all next week.
Well done, and thanks for having us.
Thank you, everybody.
All the best. Take care.